Hello everyone, thank you for being here today. My name is Binbin Li. I have a background in Chinese medicine and I'm currently undertaking a postgraduate study in psychology. Today, I will present a qualitative study by Gahadu et al. 2022, which explores how people living with early-stage dementia in Santiago, Chile, experience self-stigma in their everyday lives. When people think about dementia, they often focus on memory loss and cognitive decline. However, one important aspect that is frequently overlooked is self-stigma, the process by which individuals internalize the negative stereotypes associated with their diagnosis. Self-stigma can profoundly affect a person's identity, emotional well-being, and the willingness to seek support. In this presentation, I will briefly explain the concept of self-stigma, outline the study's methodology and key findings, and discuss the implications of these findings for psychological practice and the person-centered dementia care. Let's begin. Before we look at the study itself, it's important to understand what self-stigma actually means. Self-stigma occurs when people begin to believe the negative stereotypes that society holds about their condition. They may withdraw from social activities, avoid asking for help, or lose confidence in their own abilities. This provides the function for today's study. Then, how did the researchers investigate it? Gahadu and colleagues conducted this qualitative study with 11 people living with early-stage Alzheimer's disease in Santiago, Chile. They used in-depth interviews in the participants' home to explore their experience after diagnosis, including changes, identity, relationships, and emotions. The interviews were then analyzed to identify common themes. Importantly, this approach allowed participants to tell their own stories in their own words, giving the researchers a much deeper understanding of how self-stigma is experienced in everyday life. Unlike quantitative research, qualitative research is less concerned with numbers and more concerned with understanding people's lived experience. Now let's turn to what the participants actually shared. What became clear from those interviews that the self-stigma was not just about having dementia. It was about how people began to see themselves after receiving the diagnosis. The first major theme was feeling labeled and devalued. One participant, Gemma, described the feeling as though she had a label on her forehead, as if everyone saw her differently after the diagnosis. Another compared receiving the diagnosis experiencing an earthquake, reflecting the emotional shock and the disruption it causes to his sense of self. The second theme was self-blame and guilt. Several participants worried that they had become burden to their families rather than asking for support. Some participants blamed themselves for creating difficulties for the people they loved. Well, neither of these experiences is caused directly by memory loss. They rise from how people interpreted themselves after diagnosis. From a psychological perspective, These findings suggest that the self-stigma affects far more than emotions. It can gradually reshape a person's identity, relationships, and sense of self-worth. In other words, the diagnosis itself was not only source of suffering, the meaning people attached that the diagnosis were equally important. These thoughts begin to influence what the way they lived their everyday lives. The answer was yes. Many participants gradually withdrew from activities that had once been important part of their lives. For example, Yolanta stopped visiting her grandchildren because she was embarrassed when she struggled to find the right words. Roberto, who had always loved painting, also stopped painting after his diagnosis, not because he was physically unable to paint, but because he no longer believed his work was good enough. When the interviewers suggested painting something similar, he replied, "That's like a giving up." This is a powerful example of the why try effect, where people stop pursuing meaningful activities because they have internalized the belief that they are no longer capable. Rather than being prevented by the mentor itself, many participants limited themselves because they no longer believed they were capable. However, this wasn't the whole story. The study identified two important protective factors. The first was supportive family relationships. Participants whose family members encouraged independence rather than doing everything for them were more likely to maintain confidence in themselves. One participant, Irma, recalled her husband repeated saying, "You can do this, do it yourself." Those simple words reinforced her sense of competence rather than dependence. The second protective factor was education. Participants who understand the dementia were better able to explain their symptoms to others and were less likely to blame themselves for their condition. Together, these findings suggested that self-stigma is not inevitable. With appropriate family support and better public understanding of dementia, people can prevent not only their independence but also their identity and self-worth. We've now heard the participant stories, but what do these findings actually mean for psychology? One of the most important messages from this study is that dementia is not only a neurological condition, it is also a psychological experience. The emotional impact of dementia is shaped not only by cognitive decline, but also by how individuals interpret their diagnosis and how they believe others see them. This study has several important strengths because the researchers used in-depth interviews. Participants were able to describe their experience in their own words, which is better than questionnaire alone. At the same time, the findings should be interpreted with some caution. Most participants were relatively well educated and had supportive family relationships. Their experiences will not fully represent people from more disadvantaged backgrounds or those living without strong social supports. Well, so what should psychologists do? Rather than focusing only on memory loss, psychologists should also help people maintain a positive sense of identity after diagnosis. This may involve cognitive behavioral approach, acceptance-based interventions, and family psychoeducation, all of which aim to reduce self-stigma and promote psychological well-being. Ultimately, this study reminds us that the goal of treating the dementia is to protect identity, not to just a cognition. In conclusion, this study shows that the psychological impact of dementia extends far beyond memory loss. Self-stigma can change how people see themselves, how they relate to others, and whether they continue participating in activities that gave their lives meaning. Perhaps the most important message is that self-stigma is not created by dementia alone. Dementia affects memory, but self-stigma affects identity. It is also shaped by the way society responds to people who live with a dementia. As future psychologists, this reminds that our role is not only to help people manage cognitive symptoms, but also protect their identity, dignity, and sense of belonging. Thanks for, thank you very much for listening.